The last couple of episodes in Vinland Saga Season 2 have been filled with a lot of beautiful moments, like this, and definitely this right here. But I found this moment right here to be the most beautiful, not because of the animation or the soundtrack underneath this episode, but mainly the interaction between Thorfinn and Canute. This scene right here really taught me a valuable lesson in life, and that lesson is, the last impression is a lasting impression. And this is probably a thing that I believe is how Thorfinn changed Canute. It probably won't make sense to you right now, but by the end of this video, you'll get what I'm talking about, and you'll be able to apply it to your own life. But first, we have to talk about in this whole interaction between Thorfinn and Canute, Thorfinn tried to convince Canute to back off the farm, but Canute had no intention of doing so. Now, I'm going to really explore Canutes' mind and thought process in this moment, because this moment right here can tell you a lot about human psychology and how we're able to influence people in trying to do the things that we want them to do. So in general, when certain people in our lives try to convince us to do something for them, we become defensive and resistant towards their request, because it makes us feel like that if we listen to their request, then we're doing things against our own free will, and no one likes that feeling of submission.
Submission. Now that's a bit of a problem.
If Canute listened to Thorfinn's request to back off the farm, the second he mentioned it, it would make Canute's image look bad. Think of how soldiers would think of him as a king if he suddenly decided to listen to this one small man. It would send the message that Canute looks weak. Like, how can a person of no status tell what a king should do? This makes sense why Canute stood his ground, since if he let Thorfinn get his way, then that would mean that any person can just walk all over King Canute. But here's how I believe Thorfinn persuaded Canute to back off the farm. The first thing I liked about this whole interaction with Thorfinn and Canute is that Thorfinn was openly listening to what Canute had to say, and that's the first step in trying to persuade someone. Now, this seems like an easy thing to do, but it's actually very hard, since many people just listen to the other person so they can respond back to them. But there are a few people who will listen to understand the person. In addition to listening to Canute, Thorfinn made sure not to verbally attack Canute's beliefs. I'm not sure if you guys remember, but during that conversation, Einar was also there, and he started yelling at Canute and attacked Canute's beliefs. And generally, when you're being yelled at, your whole logical part of your brain just shuts off and starts to convert to the emotional side and causes you to retaliate back at them with more anger and more yelling. Now, even though Thorfinn was listening to Canute in an empathetic way, he still had to make Canute drop his emotional defensive barriers to be able to get what he wanted. One thing about human beings is that we have that constant feeling that people are always trying to take something away from us. Whether that be our time, money, or hard work, we become defensive when we feel threatened. However, there are certain situations in our life when we put down these barriers. And these are moments when we feel bonded with others and not judged by them, like our close friends or family members. I think in the past, Thorfinn and Canute built some sort of bond where Canute is able to freely express his thoughts to Thorfinn, or why else would he reveal his true feelings in this episode? So how do we make people drop their emotional defensive barriers? Well, you do it by creating a feeling of validation for the other person. When Canute was telling Thorfinn about his plans and goals, Canute said he wanted to create a utopia for Vikings. And in this moment right here, Thorfinn admitted that he never considered to save the Vikings. But this made Thorfinn think about Canute's perspective and summarize his perspective in his own head. Now, if you really want to validate people and get them to drop their guard, a better way of doing that is to verbally say out loud the other person's perspective in your own words and essentially repeat it back to them. Thorfinn basically did this in a way, but kept it in his head. But you know, that is anime logic, where characters can have a full-on conversation with each other in their own heads. But in real life, we can't do that. So we have to say things out loud from our own mouths to get the other person to hear us. And the cool thing about this is that when you summarize the other person's perspective and say it back to them, you are creating oxytocin. For those of you who don't know, oxytocin is a hormone that makes you feel warm and fuzzy. It's typically called a love hormone and helps build trust with one another. So anytime you're holding hands with someone, receiving a hug, or feeling understood in a conversation, you're getting that hit of oxytocin. To sum up what I mentioned here, in order for you to be heard, you have to make the other person feel heard first. Let's talk about this last part of the scene where Thorfinn said he was just going to run away. So at the start of the conversation, Thorfinn came in with a demand to tell Canute to leave the farm, and this made Canute feel like he was being controlled by Thorfinn. Then after all that talk and breaking down Canute's emotional barriers, Thorfinn ended it in a way for Canute to make a decision on his own free will. I thought this was pretty cool because it makes you think, how do I get what I want without asking for what I want? At the end of this conversation, Canute felt like it was his own decision to leave the farm. And when people feel like they get to make their own choices, they are generally better off feeling in a good mood. And this brings me back to the statement I made in the beginning of this video, which was, the last impression is a lasting impression. Personally, I feel like the last impressions are more important than the first impression. Not that I'm saying you shouldn't make a good first impression. You should also make an equal or greater last impression on people. Think of some of the people in your past who you had a conversation with. Chances are that you will mainly remember the last thing they said, or actually the last way they made you feel. And that's what I believe happened to Canute after his conversation with Thorfinn. Now, I haven't read the manga at all, so I'm just going to say this as an anime-only guy, but after Thorfinn and Canute had their conversation, Canute left the island feeling in a better mood than he arrived, and that was primarily because of Thorfinn. I believe later down the road, Canute will remember Thorfinn for this moment and remember Thorfinn's last impression on him. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I still feel like I wasn't able to properly articulate how great this interaction was, but let me know if you have any thoughts about this interaction or just about Vinland Saga in general. Also, thank you guys for 1,000 subs. It's crazy to think about how there are thousands of people out there that like this channel and what I make. 1,000 subs might seem small to most people out there, but it's pretty huge for me. Thank you guys once again, and I hope you guys have a great day.